Alright, hello everyone. Got a couple requests to make this video, so it's gonna be a little bit of a long one, but gonna go over how to sculpt clothing for an avatar, how to weight paint it, and how to add blend shapes to it relatively quickly and easily. We're gonna use this hoodie that I found on Gumroad. It's free. Link it in the description so it's easier to find, and we're gonna go ahead and just use it, and we're going to sculpt it for this canis right here. This is my personal canis, and we'll weight paint it. We will add the corrective blend shapes that Rosillo has put onto the canis. It's very similar for the Rex. It's very similar to a lot of different models where it has correctives and those blend shapes are required to work. If yours doesn't, it's kind of a step you can skip, but it also shows you how to easily add blend shapes to a piece of clothing or to a model. So we'll go ahead and get going. So first things first, going over a couple little Blender things that we got to have installed. These are going to make your life a lot easier. So we want to install Cats. It's a plugin for exporting your model. It has a lot of other tools like Atlas mapping, stuff to optimize your avatar, but the main thing we use it for is exporting our avatar. It's set up for VRChat, set up for the way that you would export your avatar for VRChat. So we'll have that installed. I'm going to link it in the description. We also have our robust weight transfer tool. This is going to easily transfer your weight paints from your body mesh over to the piece of clothing that you're trying to add to your avatar. So we'll install that as well. Last thing to have installed, and this will be down here, is our mesh data transfer tool. Now, I believe this costs $1 on Gumroad, so it does technically cost money, but it's worth it. What this does, it does a lot of different things, but the easiest thing that it does is it transfers your blend shapes from your avatar's body mesh over to the pieces of clothing, and that's what we're going to use it for today. It's just a quick and easy way to transfer blend shapes, which is great because I know the Rex currently has something like 130 or somewhere around that blend shapes that are just correctives that if you don't transfer over to your piece of clothing, it's not going to work properly. So if you're using those correctives, you want to have mesh data transfer because sculpting those blend shapes by hand is going to take a very long time. Okay, to start out your project, something that I will go over is importing your model. Just real quick in Blender, for those of you that don't know, you're going to click File, Import, and then go down to FBX. And then you want to go into your Unity project. When you go into your Unity project, you want to look for the FBX file. It might be in an Assets folder. I know for the Rex, it's in an Avatar folder. You're looking for whatever the model is, .fbx. You want to import that. You're going to get your model in here. And I have a couple little things added onto this, but you'll get your base model in here. And then you want to set it up. You want to set it up for what you usually have it. So you have your shape keys down here. It is, if you click on the body, which you can either click on it over here, or you can click on the body mesh itself, and you'll have shape keys, which is in this little triangle object data properties tab. Go into that. Look at all your shape keys, find the ones that you have set up for your avatar themselves and set them up properly, the same you would have it in Unity. In Unity, it's a value of 100. On this, it's a value of 1. So if you have, say, corrective spine belly, we'll use that as an example, even though you wouldn't have that set. If you had that set to 50 in Unity, you're going to set that to 0.5 in Blender. Just move the decimal point over to the left 2 places, and that'll be the same value that you have in Unity. So go ahead and set that up, and you'll be good. So now that we have our avatar imported, we want to import the FBX for the piece of clothing that we're going to be using. Same thing, File, Import, FBX, and then find the FBX for the piece of clothing you're importing. Already have it in here. Right here we have it set up under armature 001. It's under a separate armature. It's that hoodie that we have free off of Gumroad. I have it linked in the description. And first thing I like to do is rename it. We'll rename it just to hoodie. And we're going to go ahead, and since we're not using any of the bones in this armature, it's for a completely different model, not even sure what model it's for, we can get rid of all the relations to this armature. So that would be in this triangle tab right here, Object Data Properties. And these are all the different bones that it's parented to and the armature it came with. So we can go over to this minus button, and we can click that and delete all of the bone parentings. That's going to get rid of all the weight paints that are currently on this piece of clothing. Once that's done and it's no longer related to the armature in that way, we can go up to the wrench tool, the modifier properties, and we should see an armature modifier here. If it doesn't come with an armature modifier, you're going to see this tab, add modifier, click it, and click armature, and that'll add an armature modifier for you. You can go ahead then and rename this to just armature. And if your model's armature, which is right up here, is not named armature, if it's named something like bones or something like that, you're going to name it to whatever that is named. Then you can go to object, and you're going to click on that, and you're going to see the armatures that you currently have in Blender. You're going to look for the one that's related to your avatar itself. So on most Resillo models, it's named armature. Some models, it's named bones. It's whatever you named this one right here. You'll click that, and now it's currently related to the avatar's armature itself. From there, to make life easier, we're going to go ahead and put this on the armature itself. So you can hold down Shift. You're going to click and drag that up into your armature, and then let go, and it'll be in the armature of your avatar. After that, we can go ahead and delete the extra armature that we have. So if you click on it and then go down to the bottom, Shift, click, it'll select everything, press delete, and that armature is gone. So now the hoodie's currently parented to your armature, it's parented to the model itself, and it's going to make life a lot easier. Now we're going to go ahead and we are going to start sculpting the piece of clothing itself. First thing to do is you want to move it into a position where it's relatively similar to your body. We can click on the hoodie itself, and we have 3 different tools we can use right here, the main tools that we want to use: scale, rotate, and move. I'm going to scale it up a little bit just so that it really matches the proportions of my body similarly, just because I want the sleeves to be closer to my wrists. So I'm going to scale that up by pulling inside of this white circle. It'll scale the whole thing up. And then I'm going to move it so that the arms are really just about at the top of my shoulders. It's just barely clipping out of the top of my shoulders. And I'll move it forward a little bit so that my back is just barely clipping out of the hoodie. So it's just about centered on my avatar. Maybe move it a little bit back so the arms are a little bit closer to where my arms are. And there we go. So we have that set up now. Now we want to make sure that that's the default position. So if I go up to item, you can see that the location, the scale, and the dimensions are all different now. And that's not the default location, scale, and dimensions. So to set those as default, you're going to go into this view. You're going to put your cursor in that view and press Control-A. And you're going to get this drop-down menu. Click All Transforms, and that's going to change the location to 0, the scale to 1, and the dimensions are going to stay the same. Then you can Control-A again and click Rotation and Scale just to be sure, and that'll set everything to default. The next thing we can do is go into Sculpt mode. So if you go up to this drop-down menu right here, click Sculpt mode, and now we're in Sculpt mode. The main tool that we like to use when it comes to resculpting clothing is this elastic deform tool. It's really going to preserve the UVs. It's not going to make any weird artifacts when it comes to UVs. So it's really the best tool to use. These are the settings I usually like to use with it. The radius set to 98 pixels, the strength set to 0.5. That's what I usually leave it on for default. So if that's what you'd like, just copy my settings up at the top, and that's what you can use. Also with this, since this is a mirrored piece of clothing, it's relatively mirrored, we can use the X mirroring so that we can sculpt both sides of the piece of clothing at the same time. If it's not symmetrical, turn off that X mirroring and sculpt one side and then the other side. But since this is relatively mirrored, we're going to use the X mirroring. And you can see that the points that we're grabbing onto are mirrored on each side of the mesh. And from there, all we have to do is click and drag in the direction that we want to deform the piece of clothing, and it's going to sculpt the mesh. Little tip to make things easier is you can toggle X-ray mode up here, and you'll be able to see where the full piece of clothing is inside of your body mesh. So we're going to go ahead and click and drag, and you can see that piece of clothing is starting to come out of the body mesh and be on the outside. So just going to click and drag just in small increments, not going to really deform as much as possible. We're just going to click and drag in small increments just to get that mesh outside of the body mesh. Now, if you make a mistake, default controls are Control Z. That'll get rid of whatever you last did. I believe you can do up to 30 in Blender. So we're going to go ahead and just keep sculpting, and the goal of this is just a rough kind of sketch of what we're doing. We're just trying to get all of the mesh of this hoodie outside of the body mesh itself. We're not really trying to fit it perfectly now. That'll be our second pass. But the first pass, we're really just going to sculpt roughly to make sure that most of the mesh is outside of our body. One thing you can do with the sleeves, as you can see, the sleeves are kind of curved away from my arms a little bit. If you zoom out, the sensitivity of the elastic to form is going to kind of increase. So what we can do is we can zoom out a little bit and then pull on that sleeve, and it's going to move a lot more of the sleeve into the right position. So we'll just continue to sculpt right here, and we're gonna get rid of all this clipping. And you can do a much better job than this. I'm just going through this quick for the sake of the speed of the video, but I don't really want to cut anything out because I want to make it easier to follow and just see how I personally do it so that more people can get this done, because it does help a lot. And once we've elastic deformed one side, this hoodie is not perfectly symmetrical. So we're going to go to the other side, and I'm going to turn off X mirroring, and I'm just going to fix any clipping points on the other side. But it did a pretty good job of mirroring what we had on this hoodie. It looks like we have a little tiny bit of clipping inside of the hood, so I'm going to turn off X-ray mode, and I'm going to go ahead and actually use X mirroring, and we're going to drag that out from the neck. And there. So for all intents and purposes, once we get rid of that clipping, it looks like once we pan around the model, looks like for all intents and purposes, we've got this basically figured out, where it's all outside of the model. It's generally fitted to it, but you can see it's a little bit baggy around the torso, it's a little bit baggy around the arms, and it's a little bit far down the wrists for what we'd like. So we're going to go ahead and kind of do a second round of sculpting just to get that all figured out. So with this, I'm going to go back, and now that we've got that first round of sculpting done, I'm going to go ahead and do a couple small adjustments. I'll pull those wrists a little bit closer to where my actual wrists are. We'll fix any clipping that comes along from that. And then I'm going to go into the torso and really just make that a little bit tighter to the body. Now it's going to start to clip a little bit because we're starting to move stuff in, but if we zoom in and we make it a little bit more sensitive, we can fix that. And we'll do the same thing with the back, and that looks pretty good for what we're doing right now. Make that a little bit tighter, and then along the wrists as well, I'm going to go ahead and pop in there. And this is once again with X mirroring on. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to take one quick 360 around it to make sure nothing's clipping. I'm also going to go into X-ray mode. Now, since this is a baggier piece of clothing, just to make weight painting easier, I'm going to drag that a little bit farther away from the arms and from the bend points on the arms, like the elbows, just so that it doesn't clip at our bend points. I'm also going to go ahead and make sure it's not too close to the armpits, because clothing tends to like to clip around the armpits, really around any bend points. So if you have a baggier piece of clothing, you're going to benefit from pulling it away from those bend points so that it will not clip as easy. So that does look pretty good. So that is a basic fitted piece of clothing. Now, before we export this, we need to go ahead and weight paint, and we need to add blend shapes, because it's currently on the armature, but it's not weight painted to the armature. So there's nothing telling it to actually move. So if I went to the armature up here and I went to pose mode and we went and posed something, you see that the arms move, but the hoodie actually doesn't. It's technically not being told to do anything by the armature. It's just parented to it. It's not actually parented to any of the bones. It's just on the armature itself. So we'll go out of object mode. We can turn off the armature with the little eyeball right there. And we're going to go ahead and do some weight painting now. All right, so we'll go ahead and weight paint now. This is usually a daunting task. It's actually made pretty easy by that tool that I was telling you to download, the Scent tool, Robust Weight Transfer. And if you want to just copy this in-paint mask value right here, I have it set to 0.5. That's just telling it how far away, I believe, from the body that the weight should be transferred. So I have it set to 0.5. It's worked for me, so that's what I have it set to. I'm going to go ahead and go to the shape keys and vertex groups as well down here, just to have that set up so you can see what's going on. Now, the vertex groups is where all the bone relations populate. So robust weight transfer, what we're going to do is we're going to drag the body into our source. I already have that set. You can click there and select body, or you can drag the body mesh into that source. Then we want to click on our hoodie or whatever we want to weight paint, and we just want to click transfer weights. And while we do that, all of our bone relations are going to be populated in here. Now you want to take a look at these and make sure that what you want to be related will actually populate. A couple things might actually get transferred onto it that you don't need, like the thumbs right here. Since this isn't really connected to the thumbs, I'm going to get rid of that because I don't want the thumbs moving around the hoodie itself. Same thing if we scroll up, looks like we got thumbs on the other side, so we'll delete those bones. And it looks as if my cheeks, my ears, and my jaw have been parented to it as well, so I'll delete those because I don't want that moving the hoodie. And the head as well. We'll leave the neck bone good. Generally with the canis, I've noticed that we don't need to have the head bone connected, but the neck bone, it's pretty good to have it connected, so I'll keep that connected. And the rest of the vertex groups look pretty good, so we're going to keep it the way it is there. So now this is properly weight painted. It's a little bit rough, and there's a little bit more that we can do, but for now, this is pretty good. If you want to do any more, you can go into weight paint mode by going to this drop down up here and clicking weight paint. And you can see that the weights that this has. The darker it is, it usually starts as blue. There's no weight. That means that the bone that it's attached to isn't going to do anything. Then it goes from light blue to green to yellow to red. Red means that the bone's going to do the most amount of movement that it can. Green is a little bit, etc., etc. Really what we want to do here is just make sure that everything on these weight paints is smooth. Like little gaps like that we can fix by going into these different tools. We've got the draw tool, which is just going to allow us to add weight or remove weight. If you click on this little button right here, you can click add, subtract, multiply, anything. I just use the add and subtract tool, and we can click there, and it's going to add weight to that. Now to smooth that out and make it look nice, we can go to the blur tool, just click and drag over it, and it's going to blur all of that information and make it nice and smooth. The average tool will average between what you're clicking on and the stuff around it. If we drag that over there as well, it's going to make it nice in one color. It's going to make it nice and smoothly weight painted. I'll do the same thing on the other side. So we'll blur those sharp edges, and I'm going to average over it a little bit just to make it look nice and smooth. Now that looks pretty smooth right there. If you have any gaps or any stray pixels or anything, you want to get rid of them, because it's just going to be kind of like a stray triangle that as you move a bone will just move without anything else around it moving. So if you have, say, like a chunk of red over here that's not related to anything else, it's usually a good idea to remove it. So that's really just adjusting the weight paints. We can look at the rest of them, just click through it, and it looks like right there it's a little bit messy, so I'm going to go ahead and blur just a little bit, just to make it look a little bit cleaner. Right shoulder as well, I like to blur that. We'll look at the right arm, that looks pretty good. Elbow and wrist look good. And that looks all right. So our weight painting has been completed. Now, that's a quick and easy way to weight paint. You can get a lot deeper into it. You can make it look really perfect, but that's the easiest way to do it if you're trying to do this quickly. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to add in our blend shapes, and this is easy with that mesh data transfer tool. So we're going to look at our blend shapes right here. First thing you want to do, go into your body mesh, and you want to go ahead and turn off all of the blend shapes at this point. Just go ahead, and so if you have a bunch of them on, if you click and drag down, it'll turn them off. If you click and drag down, it'll turn it back on. It's pretty easy. So turn them all off, and then you want to find any blend shapes that you actually want to transfer onto the piece of clothing. If you wanted to, say, mess around with your avatar and make the chest bigger or smaller, you can turn that on. The ones I usually do are just the corrective ones. So corrective spine belly, there's, if we scroll down a little, we've got the corrective elbow, corrective hips. All of those blend shapes we're going to turn on with those check boxes. What that's going to do is it's going to tell our mesh data transfer tool what we want to put onto the hoodie. So we'll go back to the hoodie once we've selected all those corrective blend shapes, and we're going to go and scroll down to mesh data transfer. With that, we can select shape keys, because that's what we want to transfer, and then we want to select exclude muted, which is going to exclude any of those blend shapes that we turned off. We want to get our source, which is going to be our body mesh, so we can go ahead and drag that down into the source box. Now we have a source, and it usually looks better for me. This works for me where I set it to world instead of local. Then we can click transfer mesh data. And if we scroll back up to our shape keys, now we have all of these different shape keys that we might want to have on the avatar. We have our breathing shape keys, which is pretty nice to have because a lot of clothing doesn't come with breathing shape keys. We have our corrective shape keys and any shape keys we might have wanted to transfer. I put this one in here for an example. So the body belly full, that would be a shape key that maybe we want to use. I personally don't use it, so that'll mess around with that. If we want to get rid of a shape key, we just click on it and click the minus button, and that's going to get rid of it. So body breathing chest, looks like that works properly. And all we do to change the value is we click on it, go to this value box, and we can drag it. And that's going to set it from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100%. And we can look at all these shape keys and see which ones actually affect the piece of clothing. Now the elbows are going to be affected. The hips probably aren't with this piece of clothing. So all of these shape keys that I put in correctives for hips aren't going to affect it. So I'm going to go ahead and click the minus button and delete all of them. And the shoulders, it looks like it's going to affect it. So now we have a fully weight painted piece of clothing that's been sculpted with all the blend shapes that we might need for correctives. If you don't have any correctives, you don't need to do that step, but if you want to add blend shapes, it's perfectly fine. And this is ready for export. So the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to export this piece of clothing. There's two different ways to do it. Easiest way, if you're setting up the model fully in Blender, which I can do a video on later, you just want to export it now. You export this model as an FBX with the piece of clothing on it. It's already parented. It only has one set of bones, and you overwrite the FBX that you have in your current Unity project. Now, you want to make sure that you save a backup. save a backup of the FBX, name it something else and save a backup so that if this does break anything, you can rename that backup to the original and you can overwrite it and it'll be back to normal. But if you want to have everything connected, this is the easiest way to do it. Now, the other way to do it, which will be something that most people are more familiar with, where you take a piece of clothing, you import it into Unity, and then you parent things based upon the bones in Unity itself. What we're going to do that is we're going to go ahead and delete the body mesh itself. I'm going to go ahead and save this first so that we have everything set up properly just in case anything breaks. So we'll go ahead and select the body and any meshes we don't want to export with our piece of clothing, and we're going to delete it. So now all we have is the hoodie, and we have the armature. The armature is important. We still want to have that in there. So we're going to go ahead and show the armature by clicking on that eyeball. And you can see we have a lot of bones that we don't need. So what we can do is we can go into that armature and we can go into edit mode. Now we're just editing the armature itself. Now if you go back to the hoodie, if we were to go to object mode, if you go back to the hoodie, this vertex groups tab, take a picture of it, write them down, write down all of the bones that are in here, because these are the bones that you want to have still showing after we go and edit the armature. That is your list of bones that this is parented to. So we'll go back to edit mode, and we're going to delete all of the bones we don't need. So if we go into X-ray mode, we can select things that are behind other things, so we'll do that. And we're going to select all of the bones that are currently unused in this model. So we'll click and drag, and then when we want to select other things, we shift click, and that'll select anything else. We'll shift click and drag, and we have all those bones, and then we can press delete bones, and it's going to delete those bones. Do that with those as well. If you'd like to see which bones you're clicking on, you click on the bone itself, and you can see up here you have the name of the bone. So we want to keep the neck bone. We'll drag over there. We can select all the fingers because we don't need those. Oops. And we can delete the fingers, but we want to keep the wrist bone. And it's done the same on the other side because we have X mirroring on. We'll delete our tail. We can delete the legs. Can delete any other extra bones that we have. So we'll get those two out of the way. And then all we have is we can even delete those two right there. So all we have now is our hips, our belly, the spine, and everything that is connected to this asset. And now our armature is all set up for export. So we can go back to object mode now. We can get out of X-ray mode. And this entire asset's set up. So then if we click export model, I'll go to my downloads folder, and we can name this whatever we want. I'll name it hoodie. It's already set up for export. We click export FBX, and that is going to be your exported piece of clothing. And you can import that into Unity. You can parent that up with your avatar the way you normally would with any other ready set up piece of clothing, and it'll work perfectly fine, just the way any other piece of clothing would. And that would be it. If you notice any clipping, if you notice any issues with it, you can come back into Blender, mess with those weight paints a little bit. You can pull out the areas on this that are clipping just to kind of make them a little bit farther away from the body as a kind of cheat way to make things work. But either way, it's going to hopefully at this point work properly with your model, and you'll have a nice new piece of clothing for your model to wear in VRChat. So thank you guys. I'll show a little clip at the end of the finished product, and just enjoy working on your model. It's a lot of fun to be able to add some custom things that nobody else has to your model and be a little bit unique. So enjoy creating things and have fun.